Welcome to Helping You Heal, the Siesky Law Serious Injury Podcast.
Welcome to Helping You Heal, the Siesky Law Serious Injury Podcast with attorney Lane C. Siesky. Lane is the founder of Siesky Law Firm in Indiana, where he represents individuals and families across Southwest Indiana who have suffered serious injuries due to someone else's negligence. I'm Lisa Mosby, your host, and today we're talking about wrongful death lawsuits in Indiana and what families should understand when a loved one's death was caused by someone else's negligence. Lane, thank you so much for joining me again today.
Hi, Lisa. Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
You know, this is always a tough subject, but something we definitely need to talk about. And I really want to start from the beginning. What does the term wrongful death actually mean under Indiana law?
Yeah, so when attorneys talk about wrongful death, they mean not a natural death, a death that may be caused from somebody being negligent or an accident, really is what that means.
And Indiana, who is legally allowed to bring a wrongful death claim after someone passes away?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Under Indiana law, the person that's passed obviously can't bring a lawsuit, right? So the court actually has to appoint someone to serve as the personal representative of the estate for the purpose of prosecuting the lawsuit. And really, anyone can serve as the personal rep, but generally it's a family member, a spouse, or an adult child that serves. And as long as there's not any fighting over that, then that process goes pretty smoothly. But it does involve some paperwork and things filed with the court to have the legal authority to prosecute a death claim.
And I know these situations often happen after events like a car accident or a truck crash, maybe medical errors or dangerous conditions. What types of cases most commonly lead to wrongful death claims?
Yeah, so I often say you just cannot make up the situations that lead to death. We see all different things, everything from work accidents, construction site accidents, car accidents, semi-tractor trailer crashes, obviously nursing home abuse, medical malpractice. Those are the most common, that we see. Products liability, there'll be a house fire due to an alleged defective appliance or something that was plugged in and there's a defect and caused a house fire. So I don't know if it's any one particular area, but those are the most common. But it's sad and kind of frightening, just to think, wow, it just happens all the time, every day, and there's no rhyme or reason to it, and it can just be from things you do in everyday life, like driving a car or sleeping in your house or going to work.
And families are often dealing with the shock and the grief when something like this happens. At what point does it usually make sense to begin looking into the legal side of the situation?
Yeah. So when someone loses a loved one, right? I mean, it's just a really, really hard situation for the family. It's unexpected. It can be a young person. It could be due to just a horrific set of circumstances, like a drunk driver. And that family, you will see that family go through different emotions at different times. So oftentimes you'll see one spouse being really strong initially and the other spouse, kind of having a nervous breakdown, so to speak, if they've lost their child. And then as time goes on, you'll see those family members kind of switch, where the one that was strong initially now is really having a tough time. And so it's really hard to bring up the subject of, hey, do we need to get a lawyer involved, or what needs to happen from a legal standpoint, because they're going through the grieving process of just losing the loved one. But from a legal standpoint, right, from a law firm standpoint, the earlier we're involved, the better, because as time goes on, a lot of the evidence can dissipate. Witnesses become hard to find. They move out of the area. Surveillance footage may be written over. If there are products or physical evidence, it may not be preserved. So one of the first things we do when we get involved is we petition the court to have someone appointed as personal rep. And then you're sending out letters, advising, hey, we've been retained and you need to preserve this evidence, so that we have it for the case. And if that's not done for a period of time, then, the case could be harmed. So there's kind of it's a delicate balance there of the family grieving and yet the need to begin to document and preserve evidence for the case.
That's interesting that you say that you point or petition to appoint a personal representative. It doesn't necessarily have to be the person's, parent or sibling. It can be somebody else related to the family that maybe is in a better place at that moment. Is that true?
Yes, that could be true. And then, also sometimes you have divisions in families where maybe this part of the family doesn't get along with that part of the family. And so you could have more than one person wanting to control that process for whatever reason. That's not ideal, right? Ideally, you want at least the family to come together for purposes of the lawsuit. But and that's why it's kind of up to the court, like it's a process. We do that process all the time here at the firm, but it does take a lot of paperwork and everything to get that formalized. But hopefully the family's in agreement. There's one person, everyone's looking to do that, and it's not going to be where they're going to fight over that.
Right. The other thing that you mentioned is the evidence. When investigating a wrongful death case, what kinds of evidence are typically important in determining what actually happened and who may be responsible? I know it varies from case to case, but if you could give us some general information on that.
Yeah, so a lot of the same evidence that you would find in a non-wrongful death case is going to be relevant. I think the difference with a death case is that the person that was killed, cannot speak now. So in a regular accident case, that person's hurt, but they can still testify. They can still say what they saw, what they heard, their side of the story. Where in a death case, you don't have that witness, right? So you're completely dependent upon other witnesses, video, or data that you get either from a device or from a vehicle to kind of piece things together as to what really happened, maybe not just the version that a potential defendant is wanting to kind of paint as to what happened or how it came about. So that would be the main thing. A lot of the pieces of evidence are the same. It's just that in a death case, you don't have the benefit of the person that was injured being able to tell their side of the story.
So we're telling their story for them. Lane, people sometimes assume that a criminal case must happen first before a wrongful death case can move forward. How do civil wrongful death claims relate to the criminal investigations, if at all?
Okay, so just because someone dies in an accident doesn't necessarily mean there'll be a criminal case, right? If it was purely an accident, then there would not be a criminal case associated with the accident. But other times there is a criminal proceeding. So let's say that a drunk driver causes an accident where there's a fatality. Then, obviously there's a good chance that that driver who was intoxicated is going to be charged criminally. And so there's two things that are being balanced in that situation. First, that defendant, meaning the drunk driver's right to exercise their Fifth Amendment right not to say anything that could be used against them, right? So when we file the civil case, a lot of times the defense attorney will want to move to stay the proceedings in the civil case pending the outcome of what happens in the criminal case. And other times you can kind of work out an agreement where, hey, we agree not to take the deposition in the civil case of the defendant, in the criminal matter, right? Because they wouldn't want to testify in the civil case and have that used against them in the criminal case. But otherwise, we can do other types of discovery and use subpoena power in the civil case, even while the criminal case is going along, so that we can get surveillance video or, depose other folks in the civil case that are not where the defendant, him or herself, is the one giving testimony.
And Lane, what types of damages can families potentially recover in a wrongful death case in Indiana?
Yeah, so Indiana is actually pretty complicated when it comes to this. And I tell clients, look, the people that are writing the statutes are, they don't always label everything where it's the easiest to understand. But in Indiana, we actually have 3 wrongful death statutes. We have one for children. We have one that's called the adult wrongful death statute. And then we have one that's called the general wrongful death statute. And so I'll explain those each here. But basically, which wrongful death statute the case falls under determines what damages you can and cannot pursue. So if we first look at the general wrongful death statute, that applies when someone is killed in an accident and they are either married or have dependents. Okay. And in that situation, the law lets them recover a certain category of damages, and there's really no cap on how much can be recovered. If it's an adult who passes away, but they're not married and they have no dependents, then the law has what they can recover and not recover, but the damages are actually capped. So that sometimes that's a surprise to families that, well, you mean this is all, Johnny's life was worth? And we say, no, Johnny's life is irreplaceable. You can't put a dollar amount on it, but this is all that the law will allow you to recover because Johnny was not married and had no dependents at the time of his death. So there's a lot to it, and that's something where, when you're in a case like that and you have a competent attorney, they're going to explain and know. And then from there, you set the strategy on the case based on what you can recover and what you can, and so forth and so on.
Lane, I don't know if this is possible, but can you share an example of a case or situation that you've seen that illustrates how a wrongful death claim can help a family move forward after such a tragic loss?
Okay. In my experience, typically families are looking for a couple of things from the lawsuit. I think, people realize that no matter what happens in the civil case, it's not going to bring their loved one back, so there's that. But I think families look for, number one, they want to know not just what happened, but how and why it happened, and we always tell families that, look, we just want to know the truth about what happened, and we will be aggressive and we will leave no stone unturned in trying to figure out exactly not just what happened, but how it happened and why. And, I'm a nice person, but in litigation, I would chew your leg off down to the bone ethically and professionally, and then I would go eat a turkey sandwich at lunch and not think about it. Because our job as a law firm, is to find out what truly happened. So I think the peace of mind of knowing what really happened is a big piece of it. I think secondly, there needs to be accountability. If this is a nursing home abuse case, if this is understaffing at, a daycare, or if it's a construction site accident where safety precautions were noted to be deficient and they were ignored, if it's a trucking company that's not doing what they should be doing and making the roadways unsafe, those are all things where the defendants need to be held accountable so that they don't continue to do those things, and that this doesn't happen again and again to other people here in our community. So you have the knowledge, the education of what happened and why. You have the accountability. And then the third thing is, you're often taking away a breadwinner for the family, which affects maybe the kids' college, ability to pay for college, different things like that. And so there is the financial aspect of trying to lessen the blow of losing someone who, was contributing to the family and taking care of the kids financially and things like that. So those three things stand out to me: education as to what and why, accountability, and then the financial aspect of it.
And that makes sense. I don't know that you ever actually get closure. You always have that loss, that sense of longing for that person. But understanding really does help with being able to move forward. So that makes a lot of sense. For families in Indiana who suspect negligence may have contributed to a loved one's death, what are some of the most important things that they should understand about how these cases typically proceed?
Yeah. So, we live in a very fast-paced society where, you can go to the internet, Google, or AI, and ask a question, and before you're done pushing a button, here comes the answer. But lawsuits and cases, even though we don't like it, they take time, because you're dealing with an insurance company. Most likely you're dealing with another party, or perhaps many different potential defendants. You're dealing with all the attorneys, their calendars. You're dealing with the court system. And so what I would tell families, or what we do tell them, is we're going to be aggressive and we're going to stay after this. But, the wheels of justice, they grind slowly, and it's going to take time to get those answers, to hold, people or entities accountable, and to help to lessen the financial impact. It's going to take time. So I think that's the main thing, is that it's a process. It's maybe not perfect, but it works. It just takes a lot of time.
Well said. I want to thank you for your guidance through this process today. And also thank you for being there for these families in such a difficult, tragic time. It's a tough part of the law, but somebody has to do it, and you do it very well. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
That's it for today's episode of Helping You Heal, the Siesky Law Serious Injury Podcast. If you or a loved one has been affected by a serious accident in Southwest Indiana and want to learn more about your legal options, you can visit sieskylaw.com to contact the Siesky Law Firm. Thanks for listening, and please remember to like, subscribe to the show, and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.